I wouldn't say that it's a stretch at all. I mean, like, fundamentally changed how I view the world. I purely view the world in terms of like Greek participles.
Okay, that needs explanation.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Welcome to Classical Etc. My name is Paul Schaefer, and I'm here with Martin Cothran, Tanya Charlton, and special guest Mitchell Holley. Today, we are going to be talking about, I'm not sure why Mitchell's name is funny, but we're going to roll with it. Today, we are going to talk about Greek, preferably Latin.
So much for a special guest.
That's why you get a specialist on Greek on, so you can talk about Latin.
That's correct. That's correct. That's where we're headed. We'll see how it goes. But before we get there,
I'm going to bring back every minute of this podcast to speaking about Greek.
Okay, well, let's try. First of all, I have to say, I feel like I am parroting Shane. I have sat in that seat so many times, the very words I'm using. But before we get there, I just feel like I'm parroting Shane.
Well,
Shane, we miss you. I am temporary host, by the way. This makes 2 in a row, but I'm making very clear this is temporary.
We voted him temporary host. He got a lot of votes for temporary and a fewer less votes for host.
Yes, and I voted against myself as permanent host.
There was one thing that was clear: it must not be permanent.
We're going to keep reiterating this to make sure I don't become the permanent host. So, but we need to start with what are we reading? Mitchell, we're going to put you on the spot. What are you reading now?
In English.
In English. Actually, funny enough, I'm about halfway through this book on the metaphysics of participation.
Okay, we're all. I mean, what do you say? What do you?
Who invited him on the show?
What's the title of the book?
It's called Participation, like Metaphysics in Christian Theology or something. Is the subtitle, and it was written by a guy at Oxford. And it's been a joy so far. A little bit derivative, I'd say, of past scholarship, but
it sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. That's
participation is a very important metaphysical concept, and it's not.
What does it mean?
Participation?
Yeah.
Well, it's as a core of sort of metaphysics. Things exist how? By what cause do they exist?
God created them.
Well, that's the Sunday school answer, and it's not too far from the truth. But
and you had to read a whole book to figure that out?
You're right. I shouldn't say anymore.
When you say that this book was, what'd you say, enjoyable, a delight?
Yeah.
A joy,
Were you participating in that which is joy?
Yeah.
And that's what made that book delightful.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could talk about participation. You're just using it in one particular way as sort of like coexisting in one time. Like, does joy exist at the time when I'm reading it, right? But there's probably other more substantial ways we'd want to talk about participation. But we could do that maybe the next one that you host temporarily.
So,
and on to better topics. Tanya, what are you reading?
Well, mine's not better because it's the same as it was the past 2 times. But I am coming in on the end of David Copperfield. I've got less than 100 pages left. And then I'm going to read Demon Copperhead and see if Barbara Kingsolver actually pulled it off. She used David Copperfield as the model for her Demon Copperhead book. And I just wanted to see. And of course, War and Peace. Now, we're going to meet tonight, our first volume of War and Peace discussion.
It's a commitment.
And then I've got to pick that up again and read volume 2. So that'll be what I do after David Copperfield. So again, next week's going to be boring also because it's going to be War and Peace.
It's a love story.
I'm just bouncing back and forth. Well, there's so much war that is just so boring.
Not much peace.
If I could skip the war and just do the peace, but you kind of need pieces of the war because you need what the characters, how they interact with the war and who they are. But I don't need all the strategy and all that detail. I can really do without. But maybe I'll get a new appreciation for war, but I doubt it.
I will say that the last time I read War and Peace, I knew it took me 100 pages to get hooked.
Well, that 100 pages was the great part.
And it took me page 75. I'm still struggling. And once I got to page 100,
that's when the war starts.
And that's when I got hooked. And so I am hooked now. I started loving it. I'm ready to roll.
Okay.
But I'm also listening because of this podcast to The River of Doubt that Tara said she was reading about Theodore Roosevelt's trip to the Amazon.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
That's what she said.
But I would say don't read it if you have a queasy stomach, because it's a very hard journey and the author doesn't hold anything back. So just be forewarned. But it's very good. I mean, great history.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but that tells me something about Tara.
Yes, it does. Martin, what are you reading?
Well, I mentioned several weeks ago that I had started reading The Red and the Black by Stendhal.
And I reminded you last week that you were reading it and never even mentioned it.
Well, yeah, I don't necessarily need to mention it every week, but I did. I went on a road trip, and so I got a little bit more of the book done, and it's clearing up some of the things the book is about. And one of the things I notice about it is this is happening in the middle of the 19th century. And the
Meaning it was written in the middle of the 19th century?
The events are occurring, and I think it is. I think Stendhal writes that pretty early. So, what really hits me with that is that the protagonist is very taken with Napoleon still, and it made me realize, because the shadow of Napoleon for a couple hundred years, really well into the 20th century, this character just dominates the thought of people, particularly in Europe. It's really interesting, and it dominates the thought of this one character. But Napoleon comes. He's not nobility. He's not an aristocrat. He's just a
short little man.
A short little man. And he's got all kinds of things that you think would go against it, but he comes out and he asserts himself on Europe. And so this whole is so modern that people admire this guy who asserted his individuality over everybody else. That's not a classical concept, I don't think. And so, people were much more a part of their cultures and their governments in their time, whereas Napoleon sort of goes against it all. And it's just the novel is kind of dominated by that presence of Napoleon, and it's very interesting.
So it's good.
Oh yeah, well it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's French, so there's an affair, and but in the midst of all that, you do get these other interesting things.
How long is this book?
Well, part 1, which is what I'm getting near the end to, is about 10 hours of a read. So it's not War and Peace, but it's
right.
a larger book.
Okay.
What is War and Peace? It's the biggest
little.
book, and it's just so physically big.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many words before you can turn a page.
Well, and Napoleon plays a part in
Massive
War
part.
and Peace.
Oh,
Massive
yes.
part in
Oh,
War and
goodness,
Peace.
yes.
And in Tolstoy's theory that the results of a battle are almost just chance. He has this weird theory about war that it's just depends on the position of the stars that day.
I may have to push back on that, because I thought he's fairly determinist, just what I recall from reading it 10, 15 years ago, was that not that it's...
Well, it could still be determinist, but not be determined by a great figure like Napoleon.
That's right. It's not the human individuals that are making these choices, but that it's kind of been defined based on all the human choices that are going to be defined, how that's...
And how
that
one
works out.
Little accidental event could change the course of the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, the butterfly effect. Is that what they call that?
Well, sort of. Yeah, that's related.
Yeah.
So you're reading War and Peace?
I am reading War and Peace. And
Roosevelt.
And Roosevelt. And there was another book I was still trying to get time to read, Kentucky. And I feel like there's something else, but we'll see. Maybe. But I listen to stuff. It's hunting season, so I listen while I sit out in the woods.
When I'm not texting you to get technical help.
When you're not texting me to get technical help. And
that happens a lot when he's in the woods.
Spends a lot of times in the woods. So.
Darn cell coverage. Like, I just wish I could be out there by myself. Tanya comes with me via my phone.
Get the service that I had just recently.
Yes.
That won't be a problem anymore.
You'll never be reachable.
No.
All right, let's get on to our topic here. Mitchell, I have this vague recollection of your study of Greek as a child.
Yes.
Was actually interesting to me.
Okay.
Can we? I
Is this
think
like 5 years old or?
Yes,
I started
right?
studying Greek when I was in 8th grade. So I don't really remember how old I was in 8th grade, but you could do the math.
And what
Google,
prompted you to do this?
It was the choice between that and Spanish. And I thought, like, Spanish, that seems lame. And my parents were like, maybe Greek would be good. So Greek. And the very first year I took Greek, I had a professor who we didn't learn anything but morphology.
Which is?
Great question. It is the study of how words change their spelling.
it's grammar.
Okay.
It's how words change their spelling. So, like, the difference between...
It's the declensions and the conjugations.
Yeah, no, it wasn't really even that, honestly.
Oh,
It
you
was-
didn't even do that?
No, it was like, under what circumstances does an omicron change into a diphthong?
Oh,
Golly, that sounds awful. Why did you continue on?
Well, good question. Because at that point, I needed to keep taking Greek because I had missed that entry point into Spanish.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, that's right. And so, that was 8th and 9th, and then all the way through senior year.
But
And
you
then-
only had to have 2 years of a language, right? But you continued it after the second year. Were you
I believe
continuing
in my school it was
voluntarily?
pretty traditional to
go all the way?
to start in 8th grade and then go up through at least 10th with the option
That's
of 11th and
good,
12th.
because
It was
you
a
can't
private
really
school in New England, so
you can't learn things in
2 years.
2 years. A language, especially,
Yeah.
is not enough. So good for
well,
your school.
they nixed the Latin program just before that, so they got rid of
Abomination.
yeah, but
My
it was
goodness.
loosely connected to a Christian education, and so to a church, and so they kept the Greek because like we got to teach our kids how to learn Greek. But then the professor was like this old school grammarian who started off as I described, teaching how words change their spelling, which is a very, very old school approach that should never be used. Old school, not in like a good sense of the old school, not like a traditional methodology, but like sort of became popular at sort of the turn of the century. When you start at the very beginning structures of learning a language and work your way up to grammar. We didn't even get to grammar
So
in that first year.
How many? Do you have a recollection of like how many hours a week you spent on this?
It got more because that first year I was like pretty tuned out.
Oh no, but I mean class time. Class time. Do you know how many classes a week did you have?
I believe it was at least 3 days a week.
Okay. And at the end of senior year, what were you able to read or use in
Homer?
Greek?
Yeah, we read Homer.
all the way.
No. We
Just-
read just sections of
But
Homer.
still, that's
That's
impressive.
good. Yes.
Yeah. And there's also, a few of the tragedies that we jumped off of quickly.
Little pieces
Oh,
of.
the pieces of
And then some of the easier dialogues like Plato and things.
Why are we taking this trip down memory lane?
Well, I feel like it's important.
Temporary host.
Well, and I should also say, one of the things
some
I thought
humanity to the Greek that we're about to talk about.
Well, and it's also helpful to realize that I went through the grammar 3 times. And maybe that was the point you were.
I did not know that.
Oh, okay.
Well, if you'd been a permanent host, you might-
Yeah, I ended up having to go through the grammar on 3 separate occasions, on the course. So I guess in like my Greek education, it was probably 14, 15 years of Greek education.
Oh, so hold on. You left out a part. So from 8th grade through senior year.
And then I took Greek every year in college, every semester. And then it was my minor. So I had to take it every single semester, my entire college. And then, a master, and then 2 master's programs, right? So over 14 years-ish of education, I took Greek.
Maybe I haven't been giving you credit enough for knowing Greek.
Yeah, that's why we're here today.
and now I don't feel bad about not asking about literature or history or philosophy because you spent your entire life learning Greek. And
I've been through the grammar 3 times, and that's not necessarily to my credit. It's because because of different forces in the course of education, I had to start back at the very beginning of the grammar 3 times, and so I had to start from like day 1 3 different times over the course of that.
So what has learning Greek done for you?
That was going to be my question. You can be temporary host next time.
It just we'll bounce it around.
Well, I mean, where to start? I mean, it's fundamentally changed who I am as a person.
That's not a stretch.
I wouldn't say that it's a stretch at all. I mean, like fundamentally changed how I view the world. I purely view the world in terms of like Greek participles.
Okay, that needs explanation.
I mean, the mountain. Well, so like in just terms of like world, like how I approach the world and view the world and see myself in it, Greek participles. But then like in terms of employment, I got a job once writing a Greek textbook.
He did.
Tanya, even though I spelled her name wrong in the email where I accepted the role.
That's correct. I did not then say you're fired before you even come to work.
But I'm sure you came close.
That's
typically
absolutely. I mean, come on.
One strike, you're out.
Especially in a publishing company where things need to be spelled.
To be fair, Tanya can be spelled multiple ways. So.
He could have been a temporary technical.
Yes, but when I offered you the job, I did sign my name. It was spelled correctly.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Glad you can spell your name correctly, Tanya.
That's right.
So this viewing the world in terms of participles.
Yeah.
What exactly does this?
So when you learn Greek, you learn that the like highest achievement of the Greek student is to understand the participle. It's like the Mount Everest of the Greek language because the participle,
or maybe the Parnassus. Sorry,
it's like it's like climbing Mount Parnassus.
Before you continue, what is a participle? So
a participle is a verbal adjective, right?
So as an example,
I love running.
Running
would be a participle.
That would be a gerund in English.
Right. English has this dumb thing called a gerund. And I'm trying to help you understand a little bit. Okay, but Greek doesn't have gerunds; they have participles.
Okay,
but
can we have a participle example then?
In
English, there's this interesting distinction between what a gerund is and what a participle is.
Well, a gerund is a verbal noun, and a participle is a verbal adjective.
Okay, so give me an example.
So a gerund, I love running, right? That's just your direct object,
right?
But then if we were to say, let me think about this. While I broke my leg while walking the dog.
Okay, so
does walking the dog?
Walking would be a verb
in that sense. While I was walking the dog, no, walking the dog.
The running man.
The running man. Thank you. That's all I needed. The running man.
So your distinction
the running
between
man fell down.
Modifies the noun.
Gosh,
right.
you all are
so
really impressing me here.
Your distinction between a gerund and a participle is the Greek participle is both of those things at the same time.
Well, that's confusing. I feel like in that case, English is probably more clear than Greek.
Because think about it. Running is the same word. It's just you're using two different words to describe how it's functioning in the sentence. So you're not actually describing what it is whenever you call something a gerund. You're actually describing what its function is. And that's stupid because you should always start with what is a thing and then ask what its function is.
Is that a peculiarly Greek thought right there?
No, that's just being clear.
Actually, I was going to point out, that's probably why the Greeks were more philosophical in nature, is because their question is, what is the thing?
What is the thing?
First,
you ask, what is the thing? It's a verbal adjective, and sometimes adjectives can function like nouns, okay? I love the good. The good is an adjective, but it's functioning like a noun, okay? So all adjectives we know can function like nouns. We don't then call that good something else because it's functioning like a noun in that sentence. So why in the world do we have, it's a substantive adjective, that's right, but it's still an adjective. So why do we need to come up with a different word when a participle is functioning like an adjective instead of a noun?
Do you think people are still listening?
Okay, back to you said that this was all in service of the question.
Really?
How did this change you?
Yes, because a participle, one of the things that makes participles so difficult to learn in Greek is that it can mean so many things. There's so many dependent clauses in Greek. And, like we have a lot of dependent clauses, like after I came in here, then I did something. So we have a temporal clause that starts with like after, or while I came in here, I was doing something. So both of those are temporal clauses, but they are set off by some sort of dependent clause. Well, in Greek, you have all of those like after, while, expressing time or manner or purpose or cause. You have words that set those clauses apart, But you also have the participle that doesn't require any of those things. The participle holds in itself all of those meanings. And it only by a mere sort of like trick of how it's used in a sentence can you distinguish any one of those meanings.
I don't think you've answered his question.
I was going to re-ask it again.
Okay.
Can I?
Well, what I'm saying, the point I'm trying to make is that present in the participle is a sort of a wealth of potential possibilities. In order to understand the participle, you have to understand the intricate way that an author might use it, because it could mean anything.
But how does that change your life?
It changed how I viewed the world, because there are certain categories that help you as sort of a new Greek learner understand how a Greek author is using it, right? So we think of all these circumstantial uses of participles,
so
like
basically
time, manner, cause.
It broadened
purpose.
your mind.
Yeah,
and it gave them categories, buckets to put stuff in.
That's
I
right.
think is what you're
That's
getting
right.
at.
There's
I
all
feel
these
like Latin does the
circumstantial
same
ideas.
thing.
That's true, but Latin has gerunds, and we know how I feel about that.
We certainly do. I'm going to get rid of all my gerunds when I go home.
Okay.
Yeah. It provided a taxonomy to
now,
view
Paul?
the world.
Yeah, back to the temporary host here, because I tried and you see what happened there.
Well, just like, you're right in one sense. It provides a lens through which to see the world, and I see all the circumstantial ways that events can relate to one another fall into one of the categories that I had to acquire in order to learn how to translate the participle.
So it enabled you to see the world better.
Yes.
Why didn't you say that?
I think it does bring up a good point, right? That like this sort of detailed linguistic study that's in a very different linguistic pattern than English is, right? Like you can study French or Spanish, and those have very similar linguistic patterns to English. But you study something like Greek or Latin, and you have to understand how the tense of the verb relates to the tense in the subordinate clause. Mm-hmm. You have to understand, how cases function, and that the genitive can have these 17 different uses. Right. And in order to actually understand all the nuances of what's being said. So it really trains the
mind to see.
Yeah, the student's mind in a very specific way.
Let's use an analogy, since Martin likes analogies. In the world, in science, right, you have this effect, this function, this effect called parallax, right, where you see the same object from, like your eyes have parallax, right? You see the same object from two different perspectives. Mm-hmm. Like if you only had one eye and you saw an object, you wouldn't be able to tell its depth. Whereas if you have two eyes and you're seeing the same object from two different perspectives at the same time, you can tell how close and how far away it is. So in order to see an object for what it truly is, where it truly is, where it's placed in the world, you have to have two perspectives on it, at least two perspectives. We use this in astronomy all the time, where we want to find out how far away a star is. We look at that star from at one point in our rotation and at another point, and we look at that same object, and through trigonometry, we are able to figure out how far away that star is. So you can only know anything really about that, where it is in the world, by having two perspectives on it.
So now you have an English perspective and a Greek perspective.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you only speak your own native langued, you're not
seeing with one eye.
Dimensionally.
Yeah, you're seeing it with one eye. You don't really see the fullness of it, right?
So that every language expresses a different way of viewing the world, and so that when you learn an additional language, you are learning an additional way of viewing the world that allows you to see it in better, in three-dimensionally. So.
Yeah.
Do you remember why Cheryl, she would always say, you have to do Latin and Greek if you can get to it? So Latin for her should be the number one classical language. Is it only because it was easier for younger students because of the alphabet?
Well, and there are, I think, educational advantages to
Latin. But Greek also.
Sure, but I mean, it is more straightforward. It teaches you a kind of mental order. It teaches you your own grammar. I mean, you can do that in other languages too, but Greek seems very different from Latin to me.
Well, I think, I think one thing that's helpful for young kids is just the fact that most of our vocabulary comes like right from Latin.
Yeah, right.
Now, and that's true for most just everyday vocabulary, right? But that is certainly not the case when it comes to scientific language.
Right.
So,
baloney.
No, absolutely. I mean, the only science would maybe be able to like push back on what I've just said is law.
Biology?
No, absolutely not. Biology?
I mean, bios logos. I get that. But no, like all the species names are in Latin.
Well,
yes, they are.
That is true. Okay, but think about all the like, for example, like how all the different types of inflation or not inflation. That's economics. Oikonomia, which is also a Greek word.
He comes fully armed.
Yeah, think about all the different kinds of infection that biological life can have. Every single word for infection comes from a Greek word. Infection? Yes.
As in, can you give me an example?
The flu, influenza.
That's not. Think about like what's the
tuberculosis?
That's not. That's not.
Wait, it ends in cis. That would be Greek, wouldn't it?
Tuberculosis?
Wouldn't that come from Greek?
Well, yeah, that word does come from, but it's not.
An infection.
An infection.
Oh, okay.
So, but all the words like the infection. What's the word for the infection around the heart muscle?
I don't know.
Now I can't think of any of these words.
Okay.
But they all end in the same Greek word. So I could say it pretty dogmatically.
Okay.
I tried to help you, and you rejected all of my infections.
There you go. We'll go with that one. It's not an infection.
I think. I mean, back to this original question of like, why did Cheryl kind of put Greek second? And I mean, you said easier. I mean, right? We're dealing with the same alphabet in Latin. I think we also have to deal with the aspect that the large majority of Western works that we have that are excellent. I mean, we have some Greek, but we have a whole lot more in Latin if we're going to the original things. And Martin alluded to the order in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And the simplicity.
Have you studied Latin?
A little bit, yeah.
You usually study the simpler, more straightforward thing before you study the more complex.
Yes, and Greek has a whole slew of like exceptions and things, a whole lot more than Latin does.
Yeah, like English. Well, yeah, it's a lot more like English. Whereas the Romans really like beat their language into like following particular patterns and rules. They did not like
they were
exceptions.
A people of patterns and rules.
Well,
and their language reflected that.
They took like the beautiful richness of like the Etruscans, and then they like beat that into like a standard form, I would say.
Or it is a reflection of their society.
I do want to push back against one thing you said, that there's more literature in Latin than there is in Greek, and that's 100% not true. It is the case that if you
very passionate.
If you factor in medieval Latin, then yes, maybe. Okay. But if you factor in like the golden age of Latin versus like the golden age of Greek, which is sort of the Hellenistic period, the Attic and then Hellenistic period.
You can't cut out the Middle Ages and throw them out and say those don't mean anything.
That's not original Latin speakers. Those are people who are, English, Latin is their second language, and it has the grammar has been watered down a bit. The vocabulary is much different. It's not the elevated prose of Cicero.
I'm appalled.
If you're trying to treat like the years, like when were like speakers of Latin and speakers of Greek, when were they writing? Who wrote the most literature? By far, hands down, triple amount.
Sure.
By like a factor of X of like X, factor of like 5X.
But our culture, the Western world, that Western civilization that we're
promoting.
Engaging,
giving to one student at a time. I was trying to come up with a slogan.
I think
is one in which all of those Greek works are so worthwhile to be able to read in the original, but insofar as like the thought of Western civilization, in the West is traced in Latin.
Yeah, translated through the Romans. I understand that. That's absolutely true. The Romans got most of the cool things from the Greeks.
True.
And to this day, every student speaks in Greek. Historia. It's a Greek word meaning inquiry.
Every student speaks
History.
in Greek.
Okay. Demokratia. Democracy.
Yeah, we can do the same thing in Latin.
We can do the exact same thing with Latin.
I'm just saying the reason why the Romans abandoned the idea of democracy and moved towards a more representative sort of balance of power sort of situation until they didn't was because they went to the deep well of the Greeks, who had sort of already parsed out and with their language everything.
Sure.
Tragedy, poetry, rhetoric, political philosophy, philosophy in general. They mined it that well.
And when the Romans militarily conquered Greece, they were conquered by the Greeks culturally in many ways, and they sent their kids to boarding schools in Greece or had a Greek slave teaching their children because they recognized he's right. They recognized that the Greek culture was superior to their own, and they wanted to learn from it. You were talking about War and Peace. It's the same thing with the way that the Russians view the French. French is a superior culture, and just like in Imperial Russia, where they spoke, often aristocratic families spoke Greek in their home or French. In their home. The Roman families would speak Greek in their homes. And so
Cicero received a Greek education.
So the judgment of the Romans is that the Greeks were the superior culture. Isn't that true?
Yeah. I mean, Cicero writes in a Deficius on Duties, right? He spends a long time commenting on the Greek authors. He spends a long time trying to identify particular words that are hard to translate into Latin, and he sort of fleshes them out and tries to bring greater clarity to them because he was going to then use them in his rhetoric on the political stage.
And when Virgil writes the Aeneid, he's got the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Oh, he's absolutely riffing off of Homer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
I said riffing, not ripping. He's riffing off Homer.
Yeah, Virgil realized that if Rome was going to be great at all, it had to have something as powerful as that mirrored Homer, and so he picked up right where Homer left off.
Yes. So what we are saying here then is that it would be the ideal in an education would be both Latin and Greek.
Well, I think there's something you said early on about just the fact that, just practically speaking, what is the best preparation for the superior study of Greek?
And it would be Latin.
Latin is the best preparation for the study of Greek.
It really is, and really that's how it should be. How it should be viewed, because students just. I mean, the vocabulary is one thing, the morphology is another, but the grammar's another thing. The participles even.
Well, it's like we tell students they can get to first form Latin in the 4th grade, but we want them to wait till the 7th to do first form Greek because it is that much more difficult.
Because you can learn all the terms and grammatical procedures in Latin, which it's simpler to do that, and then having those under your belt, it's much easier, I would think, to tackle Greek. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the biggest challenges for me, we're just understanding what a case system was.
Yes, exactly.
Understanding, because it's so foreign from English.
And if you had studied Latin from 4th grade,
if I had studied,
it'd been easy for you.
Or 2nd grade.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say, when I was in high school, Latin, Greek, and Spanish were all required. And what was interesting to me was, I mean, I had studied Latin from 3rd grade, so Latin was relatively easy at that point. But and I loved. Like I just found it easier, and I had a confidence in it. And so then when I hit Greek, like I was like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. But I had classmates that were like, Greek is way easier than Latin, and it still doesn't compute for me. But it was interesting to me that certain people find one or the other to be easier. I don't know,
Was it after they had Latin?
We did Latin for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade, and then in 9th grade, Greek was added.
So
So they
maybe
had-
just Latin in 7th grade felt overwhelming, but Greek in 9th didn't because they already
had some
understood
concepts
language,
that-
right?
Yeah,
If they
I'm
had
not
learned
sure.
it in 7th grade, then they might not have said that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
To this point about parallax, though, and just the ability to see things from different angles.
I'm wondering why I'm even here.
Well, science.
Well, he mentioned parallax as an analogy, and I
I've
felt
wondered
like
that for a long time.
I felt like analogies ought to be clearer to the audience than the thing you're talking about. And I felt like this whole parallax thing was even less known to me than Latin and Greek.
Well, you have two eyes, and you need both of them.
Yes.
Yeah, but who
That
talks about
relies on the phenomena of
parallaxes?
parallax.
Okay. So what more is there to say about that?
Well, clearly,
there was,
I've said enough.
Boom.
Yeah,
Done.
I'd end there quick.
They're looking at me like the temporary host is supposed to do something.
Yes, because hurry before he opens his mouth again.
I think the point, it would be nice to end on this point, that having a second language, particularly Latin or Greek, does give you a perspective of the world that is different than just your own native tongue.
Yeah.
With that, come join us next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Classical Etc. Please consider liking or sharing this video or commenting below to let us know what you thought. This has been Classical Etc. with Memoria Press. We'll see you next time.